Hey, how's everybody doing? I decided to, clearly I don't know how to work the live on the, on the computer. So have spent the last at least 10 minutes trying to figure out how to work the live. I'm just going to wait for a couple people to come, see if anybody wants to join us. And we'll get going. Hey, Jesse, how you doing? It's good to see you. So come on in. We're talking a little bit about how to heal, healing in the wake of hate. That it's been a rough season for us Black, brown, red, and yellow folks. And I want to talk a little bit about how to not just thrive, but to survive in the midst of all of this. And so, hey, Linda, good to see you. And so just want to give folks a couple moments to camp on, and then we'll get going. Yeah, we sure will. That I hope that folks have had a great Sunday day. It's been a full one for me. I can't believe it's 5 o'clock, but it is, which is why I was a little late. But we'll just see kind of where the time takes us. I wonder if anybody, as we're getting started, if anybody has any questions about that they'd like me to answer as I talk some about how to thrive in the midst of this kind of intense upheaval of racial reconciliation, racial strife. Thank you, Casey. I'm glad you like my hair. That kind of thing. But my goal tonight is just to talk a little bit is how to thrive in the wake of hate and racialized events. We could just for the last couple of weeks, I've been thinking about doing something called This Week in Racism, and really trying to get a sense of that. But I've moved beyond it. But it seems like I could do that with with quite a bit of ease. And so this week in the national discourse as relates to racism, what we know is that that the Derek Chauvin trial is going on. That includes a defense and conversation about that George Floyd did not die from being suffocated by the knee of Derek Chauvin. And then there is certainly, we're still living in the after glow or aftermath, if you will, of the Asian American Pacific Islander massacre in Atlanta. And then along with that, we had the shooting earlier in the week of Dante Wright. And then beyond that, later in the week that we had the police killing of a 13-year-old African-American male. So, boy, let's call him what it is. And so feel free to let me know your ear, just comment. And then I will know that you're here and I'll be able to say hello. And then if you have any questions about how to thrive in the midst of hate, that I'm happy to answer those as well. But I just think I'm just going to dive in here. So here's what we know to be so. That there have been a number of different events. And Shannon Sharp said this week, if you have a Black friend and you don't know what they're experiencing in this moment in time, the strife and anguish and the wringing of the hands and concern and fear, that you don't have a Black friend, that you just happen to know some Black people. And the more I talk with my own friends and certainly my clients, what I've come to know is that people are struggling with what just feels like a barrage of events that impact us, but also maybe even, but also the impact of those and the fact that they continue to happen. That there's kind of just this, there's no taking the air out of the valve, but it just kind of continues to happen week after week after week after week. And some may say that that's because we're paying more attention to it, but it doesn't matter why it's happening. The fact of the matter is that it continues to happen. And so part of what that can oftentimes feel like is a repeated trauma. And so people have what's happening in the national discourse, and then they're also dealing with the regular everyday racism, sexism, homophobic stuff of their own lives in a day-to-day basis, and it can feel oftentimes like a pressure cooker. One of the things that I'm aware of is that what can happen is that you can find yourself losing sleep, or struggling to concentrate at work, or just super sad. And I'm concerned, especially for those of you who have black and brown boy children, that I think there's a special dispensation for people who are raising those kinds of boys. And I think that there are a couple things that you can try to do to try to manage this. The first is that oftentimes the experience of racism can feel very personal, like a personal attack, that it just feels like it's happening to you. And but I want to submit to you that while you are impacted by it, that racism itself is the problem of the perpetrator or the racist, and not you. And to the degree that now it's impacting you personally, but I think it's important to remember that it is a system of different things working to keep colonialism and white supremacy going and moving, and so that it's bigger than you. And that what I have found is that oftentimes people make meaning of racist experiences as that they did something wrong, in a way to try to understand it or control it. But I want to say, you've done nothing wrong. You've done nothing wrong, black girl, black boy, that you just haven't. Black woman, black man, Latina woman, Latin man, you've done nothing wrong. Native American woman, Native American man, you've done nothing wrong. AAPI brothers and sisters, you just haven't. That people are responding and reacting to the way that they are, and so it's important to remember that. Again, keep coming in. I see folks keep coming in. Let me know, send a comment and let me know that you are here. I also think it's important that in the midst of this type of upheaval, there you go, that's a good word, that that you don't forget some of the positive things that is happening, are happening. And so that certainly, that what we're finding is that a while ago that we were insistent on body cams, and we're seeing those on the bodies of more law enforcement officers than we have before. And so so what we know is that people are being able to be held more accountable because they're taped there. And be sure to like and share this as well with your friends as you're watching, if you're finding this to be helpful. And then so that, I mean, to me, the body cams are movement. That chokeholds have been outlawed in some states after Eric Gardner. That as well, that there is a heightened sense of, hey Preston, how you doing, baby boy? There's a heightened sense of this with law enforcement and people taking responsibility, that we see Derek Chauvin on trial. My husband and I was watching something last night about someone in Chicago where a cop was held accountable for shooting the young man 16 times, and he was held accountable for every single shot that he shot that particular teenager. And so again, there are things that are happening. It's important to kind of hold on to that. There is some shifting and some moving, and it's not fast enough, and it is not enough, but it is a start, and it's almost like the tip of the iceberg, being able to move and do something later. Okay, Linda, we'll see you later. The other thing that I want to say to you is that I think it's important to not take hold of what the racist system has to say about us, and that you are affirming your own self, that Black is beautiful, that I am as strong as my ancestors were, that I can do this, that I have all of that I need to be successful, that there's somebody or something greater than me that is strengthening me for the days ahead. And to really not don't forget to affirm yourself, because there's so much disaffirming information coming at you about who you are and your people and all of that. And that's not who you are. That's not who your people are. That's not who your family is. And so it's very important to continue to affirm yourself and not wait for the affirmation of who you are and what you bring to the table and how amazing and magical and joyful that you are, to not wait for other people to do that. I also think it's important to find your folk. Like, find your folk, really. And what I mean by that, people who are able to support you, who get it, that you don't have to interpret it for anything for, but to just find your folk. And for some of us, that may mean other people who look like me or look like you. But for some people, it may not mean that. And so that's important to pay attention to as well. I think, too, that it is useful. Jesse says, where they at? Well, that's a good question. I think not all your folk are local. And so that is important to remember, that sometimes you have to go outside of your locality to find your folks, especially for those of us who are living in hyper white spaces, like myself in central Pennsylvania. And so that you may be able to find your folk where you are, but it might be outside of where you currently live. It's been interesting. One of the things that I've been aware of in the middle of this pandemic, that one of the ways that my husband and I oftentimes manage living where we live is to go other places and that are more densely populated with people of color. But the quarantine and the pandemic has made that difficult. And so that's been something interesting to negotiate. So I see, Kenya, you're talking about a situation that Jeremiah had at school, and he's a baby for folks that don't know. And I think that you affirm him, and that I think for parents it's really important that you start that affirmation process long before they get out of your house into the first system that they would likely belong to, which is the educational system. And so that when racism comes at them, that they are well equipped with different information as a foundational source of knowledge. I also think, so when I was working on the podcast, initially, and I interviewed people right in the middle of the civil unrest following George Floyd's murder. What I found at that time, that there were people who were video watchers and there were people who are not video watchers. And sometimes, to me, the videos can feel a little bit like murder porn. And so you have to figure out whether you want to watch them or not. I have made a very solid decision to not watch them. And in fact, if I'm watching the news or something that I think is going to show snippets of the video, I keep a remote very close so that I can fast forward or pause or whatever I need to do, because I'm not trying to see another Black man killed. No, ma'am. No, sir. Now, I know that there are folks out there who think that that's a way to honor them and to honor their memory, and I'm for that. If you are a video watcher, have at it. But this is what I want you to remember, that your eyes and your ears are the window to your soul. And I am careful on an everyday basis anyway about what I ingest into myself. Whether that be food or foolishness or murder. And so I encourage you to continue to think about that as well, about how much of this do you want to take in? How much of the trial of Derek Chauvin do you want to take in? How much you don't? How much of social media you want to take in? How much you don't? I know one of the things that I had to do in the middle of the George Floyd's, the civil unrest following his murder, was that I had to cut some people off so that I wasn't taking in the rhetoric that was on their pages, like all lives matter and that kind of thing. That wasn't working for me, and I was finding it to be very painful and hurtful. And so instead of kind of taking that in to myself, to my soul, to my spirit, I was like, that's okay. Let's just cut this off and make it better or different for myself. And so I think that it's really important for you to kind of manage yourself as well. Now, one of the things I was thinking about, I heard somebody talk about a compusult. So like, what do you call it? A compliment and an insult together. I think that moving with somebody that says like an example, you're so articulate, or you really did a good job with that, when there's kind of this surprise around it, or one of my favorites, I really like your hair when it's flat and straightened or relaxed, or I don't relax my hair anymore, so that's not sealing. But I oftentimes, when people say things like they're stunned at my competence or that of somebody else's, black or brown, I will just ask them from a place of curiosity, are you surprised, or what made you say that, or what led you to that? I think that curiosity is a very, very, hey, Cousin Tina, a very, very powerful tool, and that it can be useful to you to push back some of the stuff that is coming at you. The other thing that I just wanted to note is about fear. And it like false evidence being real. But in the case of racism, maybe it's not quite as false. And I just want to encourage you to face your fears and face it and rise. So face everything and rise, versus false evidence appearing real. That now, there's some places that fear is your friend, that if you're in a place where you're concerned about yourself and you don't quite know what to do or say, or you think you might not be safe, then get yourself out of there. Like, pay attention to that. I think that we as black and brown people have what Greer and Cobbs calls healthy cultural paranoia. And in that, that you struggle with trusting and trying to figure out what's safe. And it's really a typical trauma reaction. And in doing that, that can lead to fear and anxiety. And so I just want to encourage you to just kind of pay attention to that, but also face everything and rise. Don't be afraid to face something, but face it appropriately. And then when you find that you can't quite do it, that maybe you get you some help, or you delegate it up, or whatever the case may be. But what I don't want is people to be bound by their fears. So I talked about curiosity, depersonalizing. Remember that it is not your fault. Applying faith to your fears. Looking at some things that have been hopeful, like where we have come from, whether it's body cams or people being held accountable, or trials happening quicker, or people being fired from their jobs after 26 years, and you don't know the difference between a firearm and a stun gun, right? That there is a level of accountability that it's not happening. One of the other things that was great for me this week, as far as hope installation was concerned, was the officer in Buffalo who actually his pension was restored to her in arrears after she had tried to do what she needed to do to disrupt a chokehold in one of her officer colleagues. I also, and then of course I talked about that your eyes and ears are the window to your soul. Things that you can do to dispense your feelings are also helpful. As you might imagine, I highly, highly recommend therapy. That it's a great way to make sure that you are kind of paying attention to what you're feeling, what you're doing, and a great way to talk it out as a catharsis and not hold that stuff in. When you hold it in, what can build up is anger and resentment, and that's not good. The Bible says it's bitter to the bones, but also what can happen is that what we as therapists know is depression is anger turned inwardly, your outward anger turned inwardly on yourself. And so, or that you're eating it as well. So that certainly therapy can be a great tool for you, and as well as journaling, maybe even thinking about some type of walking and exercising. The episode for the podcast this week is actually a Black woman who has invented a yoga system called Chameleon. And I think that there are things about some of these alternative approaches that can be useful as well. And so go over to the podcast and listen this week to what Eternity Phillips has to say, or explore mindfulness yourself. There's a great app called Liberate that does mindfulness from a more social justice perspective. There's Abide, which I love, that does mindfulness from a more biblical perspective. And so that's something that can help you as well. So the last thing I would say is do something. And so whatever is in your wheelhouse to do that. And so if that means, hey, Mary, if that means that you do something like this is my something to do. Like, I have a skill set as relates to psychological health. And so I'm trying to share knowledge about that to help people to do better so that they can be better. But whatever it is for you, or cutting a check, or being there and a listening ear for somebody else, or whatever the case may be, but don't be afraid to do something, to march, to give to the fund for people who have been jailed, whatever, but do something. Because part of what can feel so frustrating, and I kind of ask myself that, like, when the new thing happens or the new shooting happens, it's like, so what am I supposed to be doing? Like, is there something I'm supposed to be doing to make this better? And so I encourage you to ask that of yourself as well. So remember, 1, it's not your fault. 2, that consider some hope installation. Remember some things that have happened that have been good. 3, don't be afraid to get a therapist. 4, depersonalize it. Remember, it is not your fault. That is so very important. 5, your eyes and ears are the windows to your soul. And my last one is, don't forget to stay grateful. Now, I'm not talking pie in the sky like, oh, I'm so grateful. That's not what I mean. But I'm talking about an active practice of gratitude. And meaning that that you can remember each day 5 or 10 things that you are grateful for. So as it relates to this particular week and this time of racial radicalism and upheaval, here are some of the things that I am grateful for. And I encourage you to go in the chat and put what you're grateful for. I am grateful that Derek Chauvin is on trial. I am grateful that we have video evidence of the murder of Dante Wright. I am grateful that the woman in Buffalo got her pension back. I am grateful that I was able to work with 2 different groups of students this week. One, a group of 70 at my own school, talking about issues of race, racism, diversity, inclusion, and access. That there was also the opportunity to work with Penn State Abington that I got a chance to do as well, right here from my perch in my home office in my own life. And so those are some of the things that I am grateful for. I mean, I could extend it out that I'm grateful for my husband and that he's such a good friend, and he is part of, when I say my people, that he is my people. I'm grateful for each of you showing up today, and for all the people who are going to like and share this and watch this video. And I'm grateful for just another perspective on a way that I can help in the struggle and in the fight, and that I'm not powerless to make something different. So stay grateful and depersonalize. Remember, you don't have to do anything wrong in order for people to respond in racist ways. Toni Morrison has a quote that I'm going to try to find really quick about racism being a distraction. And I think it's so good that I want to read it to you if I can. It says, here we go. The very serious function of racism is a distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language and you spend 20 years trying to prove that you do. Somebody says your head isn't shaped perfectly or properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Somebody says that you have no art, so you dredge that up. Somebody says you have no kingdom, so you dredge that up. None of this is necessary. You know why? Because there will always be one more thing. And so remember that racism is just a distraction. And that's from our auntie, Toni Morrison. Be sure to listen to the podcast. Go ahead and comment on it as well. This week, Black Yogis. And then next week, I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. And then we'll move to being the new kid on the block. We also have some other exciting content coming your way here soon, including a podcast episode, probably a live, talking about what if you are the victim of discrimination and harassment. What do you need to do to get your ducks in a row? We're going to be talking with a lawyer about that. And so thank you so much for listening. Thank you for all your support, and have a great rest of your Sunday afternoon. Bye-bye.